so in this lesson we're going to be taking a look at how to use condition statements inside of Maya. Condition statements are basically checking if a condition is true or false, and we can put that out in several different ways. So the most basic way would be saying if true, and that has to be a capital T. Then what do we want to do? So the statement here has to have a colon at the end, and then the next line, or any lines that are indented immediately after this if statement will be what happens. So we can do mc.polysphere. So if we look at this now and run this code, it will run and create. So right now it's checking to see if this statement is true, and we just put true in here, so it's always going to be true. Then run this command. So what we can also do is say if false. So in this case, it didn't create another sphere. Let me delete that so that you can see. There you go. So this time it's checking the statement and it sees that the statement is false. So it doesn't create the polysphere. So we are, along with just true or false statements, which in this case really don't mean anything to us right now, we can do expressions. But with a true or false statement, like if you had a variable that could potentially change, like for example in the future if you had a checkbox, you can have a variable checkbox variable, and it is equal to true, and then you can check this variable. So if checkbox, let's spell true correctly, there we go, and then let's copy this and replace it here. So when we run that, it creates it. So we can have a checkbox that runs the code or not, and then the checkbox turns the variable true or false. So that's one way to do that with a variable, but then like I said, we can also have expressions. So let's have two variables here. We'll say a equals 1 and b equals 5. We can say if a is equal to b, then we'll create the polysphere. And in this case, it is not the condition. So if we run it, we can see it doesn't create the sphere. And let's give ourselves a little bit more space. Actually, we don't need the history right now, so let's just look at the code. Okay, so if a is equal to b, so make sure that when you're doing a condition statement that you're using a double equals, because this is checking to see if this value is equal to this value. So in this case it is not, so it outputs a false here because this condition is not true, and then it doesn't create this. But if we change this to 1, so a is now equal to b, and run this, we can see that it creates a sphere for us. Along with the comparison that we have here for a and b, we can do things like greater than. So if a is greater than b, and let's clear this in the scene and run it, and we can see it doesn't create it because a is not greater than b. So let's make it greater than b. That is fine. Run, and we get a sphere. So the condition is true. We can do the same thing with less than. So if a is less than b, we can run that. There's also less than or equal to. So here we can see that it doesn't run the sphere command, but it does go through without any errors. So we can see that that's correct. So now if we run this, it will create the sphere because it is equal to or greater than. Okay, so those are the different expressions that you can do. Along with that, you can also add something like or. So let's say if a is equal to b, and then this is or. You can do or that way as well. Or let's create another variable. A, or not a, but c is equal to 21. So we can say or a is equal to lowercase c. There we go. So if we run this, it creates it. So it checks the first statement, and that doesn't turn out true. But then it checks the second statement, and it is true, so it creates it. So either one of these can be the result that we're looking for. We can also do AND. So now, if we do this, both conditions are not correct, so it doesn't create it. But if we were to make this 21 as well, we can see that it creates a sphere. So that's a little bit of a way to get the comparison happening here. But maybe we want something to happen if we have one condition correct. And then we also want to check to see if A is equal to C. And if this happens, then we're going to say mc.polycube. So here we should get a polysphere, which we do, and a polycube. So it goes through and checks each one of these statements here, and it sees that they're true, and it executes them. But what if we wanted this to execute and check if it's true, but only check this if this is not true? So what we can do is say if this statement, and then change the if on this one to else. So these are kind of working together. If this statement becomes false, then we check this statement and it will run this one. So let's try that. Oh, sorry. With the else statement, you can't have a expression. So with the else, you would run it like this. So we don't have another value. I'll show you how you can actually put a statement there. Here with the else, it basically checks if this is true. If not, do this. So in this case, it is true, but let's change this to a different value and run this. And we'll see that now it creates a cube because this is false. If this is false, it's going to run this. But what if we did want that expression the way we did a minute ago? C is equal to A. There is another command that we can do, is called elif. So this is else if, and that gives you the ability to have a condition there. So let's run that, and we can see that it creates a cube. Clear the scene really quick, run it, you can see it creates a cube. But if this was false, so C equals B, it won't create anything. And you can chain as many of these else ifs as you want. And at the end, we can put an else and a colon, and then next line, and then MC poly helix. Let's do that. And now we'll see when we run it, we create a helix instead. The else always has to go all the way at the bottom. It's the last thing that you can actually run with the conditions. So if you have an if or you have an else if, these will all run, and the else has to be all the way at the bottom. And in order to have an else if, you need an if. The else can run after an else if or an if. So that's kind of the way you can do that. We can get a little bit more fancy, and instead of having a variable this way, we'll create a little bit more functional variable here, and we'll say, let's get rid of this. We'll create a variable self for selection, and we'll say mc.ls SL equals true. So what this command is doing is creating a variable that we decided to call a cell for selection, and it is based off of a list, and it is listing the items that are selected. So let's check this out really quick. If we print cell, and let's open up this here, and actually let's put this inside of parentheses. It will work either way, but this is a little bit more formal. We can see that we have the p helix 1 that is created and that is selected, and it is part of the list. So what we can do now is check, say print len cell. So this is a function inside of Python that lets you check the length of a selection. So here we are checking the selection of this variable that we created, which is a list, and it says that it is 1. So we know that this expression will output a number of things selected. So if we wanted to do something, we can say if cell is greater than 0, then MC poly sphere. So it's going to create a sphere if something's selected. There we go. So now if we don't have anything selected, we don't have anything selected in the scene now, we run the same exact script with this condition statement, it does create something. So let's check without the sphere selected. Let's print len of cell, and I'll just run this section of the code here. Should be 0, so cell should not be greater than 0, but it creates it. Oh, that's why. Cell is a list, and right now we are just checking the whole list, so it is something. What we want to check is len of cell. So now, if we run this, we'll see that we don't get a sphere. Let's clear this out and test it. I only want to get rid of the spheres, but it did work that time. So making sure that you're comparing the right thing does help a lot with the conditional statements, but once we were comparing the right thing, so we don't want to compare the list because there is a list even though it's empty. What we want to compare is the length of the list, so we can put the function here and compare it to 0. So as long as the length of the list has something in it, so meaning as long as something is selected, it will do this. This is a good way to kind of catch to make sure that your script executes properly. So a lot of times you need a user to actually have something selected in order to run your script, and if they don't, your script won't work, so you need to be able to catch that. So we can say else at the end and then print select something. Okay, so let's delete the sphere and run this code, and we can see that it runs it and it says please select something because we have it on the if statement. So if we select something and run that same code, it does create the sphere, and it doesn't print out please select something. So that's the way conditionals work inside of Maya. There's obviously a lot more to it, but these are the basics, and we will see you guys in the next video.